All right, let's now say something about labor unions, though, because that might seem like I was being a bit glib. So let's get into it. We read this. Retail stores like Walmart and fast food corporations like McDonald's cannot produce wealth without employees. Can you believe the insights of this person? They need employees, people. Don't those employees have the right to, quote, coordinate their actions with those of others in order to achieve their purposes, unquote? For example, in unions? You would think, I love you would think that free market philosophers would encourage workers as part of a free market economy to discover the market value for their services through negotiation. You would think, they say. You would think, but I guess they just don't. Well, actually, if you read the best-selling libertarian economics book of all time, so pardon me for digging out an obscure title like Economics in One Lesson, Henry Hazlitt says precisely this, that of course on the market economy you could have labor unions. And indeed, they can serve a purpose, as Murray Rothbard says. There can be employers that simply do not realize that they're paying below market wages. And when they realize that suddenly they can't get workers, well, this can help them to realize they've got to bump up their wage bids. There's no reason that you can't have a voluntary labor union on the free market. So you might think free market, yeah, well, they do. So why are you acting like that? Okay. So this again shows me that there's absolutely no engagement going on with libertarians at all. You can't even bother to read Henry Hazlitt, the book that's sold millions of copies. It's not even that long. And I mean, it's called Economics in One Lesson. So we're not exactly talking about a PhD dissertation here, but nothing. I might add, though, that the point is the labor union voluntary or coercive? If it's coercive, then again, we forfeit the idea that you could apply to it the concept of spontaneous order. Because again, this is a category mistake. What is the idea of spontaneous order? The idea behind spontaneous is that it doesn't require central direction and that it's voluntary, that people just make decisions voluntarily to go ahead and do something. And the idea behind spontaneous order is that it's all peaceful. That was the great libertarian social insight, is that you can have peaceful resolutions. You can have a peaceful outcome. You can have a peaceful approach to creating amazing things. But when you look at the privileges labor unions have, they're anything but peaceful. And in my book, 33 Questions About American History You're Not Supposed to Ask, there's a pretty substantial chapter that goes through and lists all these various privileges that do involve the initiation of force. And that's not what we're talking about when we talk about spontaneous order. Again, accomplishing something through force requires no social theory. It's easy to see how it comes about. If you clock somebody over the head and then get what you want, nobody needs to write a dissertation about how that was possible. Whereas if you have a global division of labor producing an extraordinary array of consumer goods with an amazing latticework of capital goods stages, that does require explanation. How the heck did that happen without any single human being or any single committee coordinating the whole thing? So let me just read one little passage from Edward Chamberlain, who was a professor at Harvard University, describing the unique legal status that labor unions have enjoyed. And you'll see why, therefore, this does not qualify as spontaneous order, because necessarily the way they operate is through violence. He says, if A is bargaining with B over the sale of his house, and if A were given the privileges of a modern labor union, he would be able, 1, to conspire with all other owners of houses not to make any alternative offer to B, using violence or the threat of violence if necessary to prevent them. 2, to deprive B himself of access to any alternative offers. 3, to surround the house of B and cut off all deliveries, including food, except by parcel post. 4, to stop all movement from B's house so that if he were, for instance, a doctor, he could not sell his services and make a living. And 5, to institute a boycott of B's business. All of these privileges, if he were capable of carrying them out, would no doubt strengthen A's position, but they would not be regarded by anyone as part of bargaining unless A were a labor union. And Hayek, F.A. Hayek said, We have now reached a state where unions have become uniquely privileged institutions to which the general rules of law do not apply. So if you're making threats of violence or engaged in violence, that's not what libertarians think of as spontaneous order, because it's not something in need. It's not something that is awe-inspiring. How did this happen? As I say, like the International Division of Labor, that is the most amazing social phenomenon ever. And it is amazing, and you do wonder how it happens. Well, gee, how did these labor unions keep those non-labor workers out? Well, let's see. They beat 7 of them to a bloody pulp in front of everybody else. They burned one of their houses down, all of which has happened in American history. They threw, brickbats at them, whatever it is. That would be a phenomenon that you would not in a million years feel like required a whole new approach to social analysis to understand.